the fact that Christians are targeted so often and on such a wide scale, that's what makes it all the more important to actually acknowledge what's happening and who the victims are. And that is why it's a problem when prominent and influential people refuse to do that. Okay, so yesterday, shortly after the news broke of the attacks, several prominent Democrats released their canned statements of remorse. But they all used a certain phrase that has since gotten a lot of attention. Let me pull up So this is Barack Obama. This is what he tweeted yesterday. He said, "The attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity. On a day devoted to love, redemption, and renewal, we pray for the victims and stand with the people of Sri Lanka." Here's Hillary Clinton. "On this holy weekend for many faiths, we must stand united against hatred and violence. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attacks on Easter worshippers and travelers in Sri Lanka." Julian Castro. "On a day of redemption and hope, the evil of these attacks on Easter worshippers and tourists in Sri Lanka is deeply saddening. My prayers today are with the dead and injured and their families. May we find grace." And there were several other tweets like that from Democrats. Easter worshipers. The word Christian doesn't appear in any of these statements. They are Easter worshipers. Now, if just one of them had used that odd phrase, not a phrase that you hear often at all, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that before, Easter worshipers. But if just one of them had used that phrase, then I would say, okay, well, it's a weird choice of words, not much else going on there. The fact that Obama and Clinton and Castro and several other Democrats all seized on this one phrase at roughly the same time and phrased it basically the same way, that tells me that this is calculated. Now, this has drawn some comparisons to Ilhan Omar's tweet about Notre Dame, the Notre Dame Cathedral fire. If you'll remember last week, she when that happened, she sent out a tweet talking about the art and architecture, but didn't specifically call it a church or discuss its spiritual significance. And she was getting a lot of criticism for that. Now, I defended Omar on that because it was a perfectly normal and fine tweet. And as a Muslim, I don't really expect her to extol the spiritual virtues of a church because she's a Muslim, and it doesn't have any spiritual significance to her. So I thought that criticism was stupid. This is different, though. Okay, because this seems very much like a decision was made to avoid using the word Christian and instead to adopt a kind of bizarre euphemism. Now, why do that? Well, because Christians are not an approved victim group. These people, Obama, Clinton, Castro, etc., they don't want us to immediately associate Christian with victim. They want, if anything, the opposite sort of association. They want us to associate Christians with terrorists and bullies. But if Christians are victims, that throws a wrench in the whole narrative, and that's the reason why they chose Easter worshipers instead. And I am 100% convinced that that was a decision, a calculated decision that was made. Now, of course, we all know when they say Easter worshiper, we know what they mean. We know that people who worship on Easter are Christians. But the idea is to blunt the emotional, visceral reaction you get from hearing Christians were attacked. They don't want that reaction. So the idea is to make it sound as vague and ambiguous as possible. And yeah, that's a problem. If you don't think it's a problem, think about this. Imagine, think about after the Orlando attack at the gay nightclub in Orlando back in 2016 or 15. Well, imagine if Obama had called it an attack on bar hoppers or on club attendees or something in that vein, and had made no mention that they were gay people, chosen as victims for that fact. Well, he wouldn't do that, and he didn't do that. Politicians, especially on the left, but on the right as well, made sure to specifically mention the LGBT community and homophobia and so on. And at the very beginning, they were making it about that, and for good reason. Maybe a better analogy actually would be, just because it's more recent, would be the attacks at the mosques in New Zealand last month. Here's what. So there were 2 mosques were attacked in those horrible attacks, and here's what Obama and Clinton said after those attacks. Obama said, "Michelle and I send our condolences to the people of New Zealand. We grieve with you and the Muslim community. All of us must stand against hatred in all its forms." Hillary, "My heart breaks for New Zealand and the global Muslim community. We must continue the fight to fight the perpetuation and normalization of Islamophobia and racism in all its forms. White supremacist terrorists must be condemned by leaders everywhere. Their murderous hatred must be stopped." Okay. Well, that gives up the game right there, doesn't it? There was obviously a decision that was made to make sure to mention Muslim and Islamophobia, white supremacism. There was obviously a decision not to mention specifics yesterday. Okay, so you can't compare. I don't see how anyone could compare Hillary's tweet about the church attacks to her tweet about the mosque attacks and not see a problem. It's very clear. Okay? What she did not say, what she made a point of not saying is this is an attack on Christians. Islamic terrorism must be condemned everywhere. It's a worldwide scourge. Even though that's true, she didn't say it. The very fact that the term Islamophobia exists and Christophobia doesn't really exist, or though no one really uses it, even though Christians are killed by Muslims for their faith far, far, far more than the reverse, that tells you everything you need to know right there. It's all about narrative building. And that's all that these Democrats care about in any given situation. And the whole idea of victimhood is so valuable to them and so precious that they guard it, and they will not allow the wrong groups into that camp. They just won't allow it. And so even if there are hundreds of Christians being killed every single month for their faith across the world, and most of the time by Muslims, they can't acknowledge that. They never will. And that is cowardly and disgusting. And it would be hard to go overboard in condemning it once you understand what this is really coming from, or what the real motivation is.